Immortal and Martial Dual Cultivation. Chapter 31. Spiritual Sense appears. With the assistance of the fasting pill, Xiaochen no longer needed to spend time nor thought covering his daily subsistence for the entire month. He could immerse himself fully in his cultivation. As opposed to the other regular cultivators, he could save a significant amount of time. As the only caveat, it was difficult to describe in words just what sort of agonizing loneliness one would experience by throwing away all connections to mortality. Undergoing such bitter cultivation in complete seclusion was even drier and duller than incessantly refining medicine in his room. However, since the first day he arrived into this world, Xiaochen understood that this was a world where the weak were eaten by the strong. Only the strong deserve respect and glory. There were no shortcuts on the road of cultivation. There was no such thing as profit without effort. Such things only happened in fiction. In this world, one only could become a true expert by withstanding long periods of extreme loneliness and putting in tons of hard work. Thus, Xiaochen tirelessly cultivated day after day. Occasionally, there were birds that flew by, or the crawling sound of bugs, but he paid them no mind. He was entirely focused on the mysterious act of cultivation. Xiaochen kept his eyes shut for 7 days before suddenly opening them wide. A purple gleam flashed in both his eyes. Xiaochen got up to stretch his stiff body and took a deep breath. His entire body felt very comfortable. 7 days. 7 whole days. With the assistance of the essence nurturing pill, the purple thunder divine incantation had finally overcome the threshold to the second layer. It almost seemed as though success was a guaranteed outcome for him, as there was nothing blocking his way to success. A way incomparably smooth and unhindered. With the pill's miraculous effect and the dense spiritual energy of the surrounding area, it was not strange for him to be able to break into the second layer of the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation this swiftly. Now that the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation had reached the second layer, he would unlock Spiritual Sense. Xiaochen was extremely excited. He quickly followed the method in the Compendium of Cultivation, trying to feel the spiritual sense in his sea of consciousness. After a short while, a world he had heretofore never seen before unraveled itself before him. In that boundless space, a green spear hung in the sky, emitting a faint luminescence. This was Xiaochen's mental world. With just a thought, the mental space turned into a luxurious palace in an instant. It was indeed the same as what was recorded in the Compendium of Cultivation. He was the master of this mental world. So whatever he desired, he would be able to make. This spiritual sense was actually the will of the cultivator that exists in one's sea of consciousness. It was actually the same thing as the will a regular person had in their heart. The difference for a cultivator was that after upgrading it to a certain threshold, it would become capable of mobility, or even take a form. This palace in his mental state was the manifestation of Xiaochen's spiritual sense. The next step was to release the spiritual sense out of his body. With just a thought, the spiritual sense in his body began to surge out. In an instant, a projection of the world within a radius of roughly 500 meters around Xiaochen began to take shape in his sea of consciousness. He could see every plant or beast as though he was seeing them with his own eyes. No, it was even better than seeing it with his own eyes. Xiaochen could even feel the breath of these beasts, their pulse, the beating of their hearts. Suddenly, That green spear in his mental space seemed as though it was not willing to be left alone and came out to join Xiao Chen's spiritual sense. After it came out, it actually merged with his spiritual sense. After the spiritual sense and spiritual awareness merged together, the combined sense started to rapidly scan the surrounding plants. Soon, there were more things appearing in Xiao Chen's sea of consciousness. Once the herbs that were hidden amongst the weeds were discovered, information like the medicinal property and age actually appeared in Xiao Chen's sea of consciousness. He was surprised. After his spiritual sense merged with his spiritual awareness, they actually had the function of searching for herbs. Not far from Xiao Chen, there were a few extremely well-hidden herbs. Withdrawing his spiritual sense, Xiao Chen headed to the area that was just scanned. Indeed, there were a few stalks of white wind spirit grass behind a bunch of wheat. Behind the wind spirit grass, there was also a scarlet fruit. The wind spirit grass seemed to have aged for roughly 10 years, so its medicinal properties were excellent. As for the scarlet fruit behind, it was the far more precious and evidently recently matured red nascent fruit. The red nascent fruit was fire attributed. To cultivators who cultivated fire attributed techniques, it would be extremely helpful. In many high-grade pills, the red nascent fruit was also an important chief ingredient. Xiao Chen did not expect such a gain when he utilized his spiritual sense for the first time. After thinking about it, he realized that it was not strange for there to be some low-grade natural treasures in this vicinity. Amongst the area around the outskirts of Seven Horn Mountain, this was the area with the densest spiritual energy. It was a pity that he came in a hurry and did not bring anything for storing herbs. If he picked them impetuously, he would not be able to store them properly. The value of the herb would significantly decrease, so he could only wait until he was about to go down the mountain before picking it. Recovering from the surprise, Xiao Chen recalled some of the entry-level spells in the Compendium of Cultivation. As he was not able to build a foundation and condense a core, he could only cultivate mainly as a martial cultivator. Immortal techniques could only play a supporting role. Hence, he had to find some spells helpful for battle. There were many entry-level spells in the Compendium of Cultivation, many of which were useless in this world. Xiao Chen pondered for a long time before deciding which spell to practice. Gravity Spell, an entry-level spell that grants usage of gravity, allowing one to float in the air for a short moment. While it could not achieve the effect of flight, it was a pretty good choice when one's cultivation realm was low. Xiao Chen placed this gravity spell on the top of his list. Aside from the above reason, the gravity spell could also be upgraded. When it was cultivated to great perfection, one would be able to fly like the wind, traveling thousands of meters in an instant and still only consume an extremely small amount of essence. After he made his decision, Xiao Chen began practicing. Circulating his essence in the pattern as described by the Compendium of Cultivation, a repelling force suddenly pulsed up and down his legs. His whole body seemed weightless as it floated into the air. Bang! Xiao Chen, who had entered this state for the first time, was not mentally prepared. When he stopped circulating his essence, he plummeted to the ground all of a sudden. That was painful. Xiao Chen smiled as he dusted himself off. Although he made a mistake on his first attempt, he now had a general idea of how it worked. He should be able to get a grasp on it after a few more tries. After all, it was just an entry-level spell. For the next few times, Xiao Chen carefully executed the spell before finally discovering the trick behind it. The principles behind the gravity spell was simple. It caused him to enter a weightless state, allowing him to float into the air. Once he got used to being in a weightless state, it was no longer that difficult. After he familiarized himself with it, Selton began flying from tree to tree as though he was just having fun. Although this was not true flight, the feeling of being in the air and controlling his movements freely were fresh to him. This temporary flight gave rise to a thought in Selton's heart. If one day his realm was high enough, how would it feel like to fly like the wind and wander around the world? Following that, Selton started to practice 3 other spells: Heavenly Lightning Shield, Lightning Descent, and Lightning Evasion. In the short term, Selton did not intend to practice other spells. He understood the principle of not biting off more than one could chew. These 3 spells were extremely practical. They're all lightning attributed spells. Heavenly Lightning Shield, as its name suggests, created a shield made of lightning to defend against attacks. Lightning Descent, essentially summoning a bolt of lightning from the heavens to strike the target. Lightning Evasion, as the name suggests, is about using the force of lightning to rapidly leave the battleground. Originally, he wanted the Ardent Escape instead of the Lightning Evasion because its effects were better. However, it was a pity that Selton cultivated the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation. It would be much more difficult to execute an Earth attribute spell, so he just made do with what he had. Spending an entire day on this, Selton practiced these spells quite diligently. The surrounding thick trees were excellent targets. Countless of lightning descents were summoned, immediately splitting the trees into 2. The non-stop rumbling continued all the way until the middle of the night before they stopped. This was because Selton had exhausted all the essence in his body. Swallowing another essence nurturing pill, Selton sat once again in a cross-legged position and cultivated. After the Purple Thunder Divine Incantation reached the 2nd layer, Selton's rate of absorption of spiritual energy increased once again. The 3 white clouds by the Azure Dragon rapidly filled up once more. Selton used to think the essence came from the Azure Dragon Martial Spirit. It was only till later, after he got more familiar with essence, that he realized such was not the case. The nucleus of his essence should be the 3 white clouds beside the Azure Dragon. These white clouds were not actually white clouds. They were actually a cloud-shaped substance formed of essence. Floating by the Azure Dragon, the 2 of them had a faint connection. With Selton's realm, he was still unable to figure out what that connection was. The only good thing that Selton was clear on was that when the 4th cloud appeared, he would have stepped into the Meteor Great Martial Disciple realm. When that time came, his essence capacity would have increased once again. On the morning of the 2nd day, Selton opened his eyes and stretched his body. Sending out his spiritual sense, he did not discover anyone within 500 meters. His spiritual sense was indeed useful. Not only could it differentiate herbs, it could even be used to scan his surroundings to check for hidden enemies. This was much stronger than the perception of regular cultivators. Gravity Spell. He chanted the spell name in his heart and began to float up shortly after. He was now much more familiar with this spell than he was yesterday. Selton was in mid-air. Then he looked at the ground beneath his feet and shouted, "Heavenly Lightning Shield." A triangular lightning shield appeared, protecting Selton. This lightning shield was purple and gave off a faint red glow. This was the result of forming it with a pure lightning attributed energy. Selton estimated that it could withstand the full force blow of a martial grandmaster. Lightning Descent! Selton, still in the air, pointed with his finger as a lightning bolt as thick as a bow descended from the heavens. A thick tree on the ground was immediately blasted apart with a boom. Its might was able to rival a profound great martial technique. Furthermore, it descended from the skies. With its speed, it would be difficult for the target to evade. Lightning Evasion. he executed the final spell. Sultan's body immediately disappeared, and there was a loud roar of thunder about 100 meters in front as a bright bolt of lightning fell from the sky. Sultan's figure appeared amidst the electrical light in the air, unharmed. After he practiced the 4 spells once, he slowly descended and stopped practicing. This was because he had more important things to do today. Forging. To forge something that Sultan had desired for a long time. A spatial ring.